Hey everybody, wanted to do something a little bit different today. I wanted to open up the hood and walk you through some specific retirement planning scenarios that I've faced recently with some families retiring from Chevron and Exxon Mobil. I'm changing the situation, so obviously not sharing any personal information of any kind. But I wanted to be able to just map this out on the whiteboard and talk you through some of the things we're doing. And really what we're touching on here is how does your estate plan change? How should your beneficiaries change? How should your trust potentially change? As well as how should you build your portfolio and how should you plan around future tax rates? One of the interesting parts about the legislation that was passed 2-3 months ago, the Secure Act, is it has a huge impact. If you have a substantial IRA, so if you have a 401k plus a pension and your total pre-tax IRA dollars are over 2 million, and that's a generalization, it really depends on how much you're going to spend throughout retirement, how old your kids are, how many kids you have, so it's very unique to each individual as to who's going to be impacted and who's not as impacted. But as a real generalization, if you have more than $2 million in pre-tax assets, you have some very significant tax and estate planning that is now changed within your IRAs. So I love this topic. Classic example of how financial planning is a whole lot more than just building a portfolio and putting together some retirement projections and putting together some income projections in retirement. Really, financial planning has to include your estate plan, your tax bill certainly each year, your tax return each year, but more than that, planning out taxes in the future, how to lower your future tax rate, as well as building your portfolio, taking income from your portfolio, stuff like that. And so again, what am I doing here? I'm walking through some situations that I've actually planned with real families in the last few months. A couple coming from Chevron, a couple coming from Exxon Mobil, and total assets in these situations, pre-tax assets around 2, another with about 3.5, another with about 5 or 6 million in IRA dollars. And so why is that significant? Because if you have significant IRA dollars, we need to rethink the way that we're planning out beneficiary designations and rethink the way that we're planning out estate planning. So let's dive in. What we have here is first and foremost, as you enter into retirement, let's take a Chevron example to start with. So real common with Chevron, you have to plan around your NUA a little bit differently than others because you have 2 NUA components in your 401k. You've got the ESOP and then you have common stock. Chances are your ESOP has a huge appreciation in there, which makes it very attractive for an NUA distribution. But you also have to really plan out when you do it. And so and you have to plan out how much you do. So Chevron, you typically receive a pretty big bonus in March. And so we have to be cognizant of when we do the rollover and the NUA distribution from your 401k, moving it into the IRA or the NUA distribution shares going to an after-tax brokerage account. So we have to plan that out and understand what's the tax impact there. And maybe we need to wait until the next calendar year, or maybe we can do it all in the same calendar year. But the first step is assessing the NUA opportunity. Or if you're retiring from Exxon, certainly you're able to go share by share and really say, okay, any share under $25 or $30 or whatever happens to be in your best interest, we'll do an NUA distribution on those, send those shares to an after-tax brokerage account, and then everything else can be rolled over to the IRA. So first and foremost, planning within IRAs, making a sound decision with your NUA distribution. Now that we've done that, then the question becomes, when do we do Roth conversions? So when do we take assets from the IRA and when do we move them over to, well, that didn't work. So taking assets from the IRA, moving them over to the Roth. We don't want to do too little because at age 72, the IRS forces you to take out a portion of this bucket. So your IRA, the IRS is going to force you to take out required minimum distributions from there. So in order to save ourselves from overly high required minimum distributions in the future, we want to take partial Roth conversions and move a portion of your pre-tax IRA over to Roth each and every year. We're trying to find an equilibrium tax rate throughout the next 20 years or so, is what we're trying to do. So if we convert too little, you might have a huge tax bill in the future, but we also don't want to convert too much. So if you've got $3 million in your IRA, we don't want to convert $1 million today and trigger a ridiculous average tax rate on that $1 million Roth conversion. Not a good decision. So we have to find what is the right balance. How much do we convert to Roth each and every year? Now, that's a tax question, that's a tax planning question, but then there's also, after you do Roth conversions, there's a big investment question. And the investment question is, your portfolio should not look the same between a traditional rollover IRA and a Roth IRA. So, your Roth IRA, you should truly have the mindset that you are 25 years old again, 35, 40 years old again, and you're not going to touch this money for decades. And so it doesn't matter if you're 68, doesn't matter how old you are, as long as those Roth assets don't need to be touched in the next couple of decades, we want to be much more aggressive with that. So again, if we don't need to touch these Roth assets for a long time, we want to take on a lot more risk. We want to have much more stock exposure, potentially some real estate funds and other items in there as well. And I've also got some content coming out on stock market versus real estate versus private lending, private equity, hedge funds. So stay on the lookout for that. But Roth, we need to be a lot more aggressive. Traditional rollover IRA, that needs to be a little bit safer. And so part of that is because time frame wise, we're going to actually touch the IRA year in, year out for retirement income. But also, the IRA is a lot worse future tax planning wise with your estate plan. The Roth gets to go to your beneficiaries tax-free. The IRA does not. All right, so we have a tax planning issue and an investment issue. And I've faced this with a couple of Chevron retirees recently, and Exxon Mobil as well, because we have to make an NUA decision right when we think through what to do with your 401k. So we have an NUA distribution to analyze, and then likely the next calendar year, we're planning out Roth conversions. And so how much do we do? How many years do we do them? What do we live off of while we're doing Roth conversions? What do we use to pay the tax bill that the Roth conversion triggers? So after tax planning, we obviously have an investment issue where we need to create the optimal portfolio in your traditional rollover IRA as well as your Roth IRA. They likely should not be the same portfolio. They should probably be different portfolios. And I could draw another circle for after-tax brokerage portfolio. That should also likely be different. They all have different tax structures, and so we need to be cognizant of that. But now let's move on. Let's move on to estate planning. This is where it gets really interesting and is completely different than it was 4 months ago because of the new legislation that has passed. So, really quick rundown. What is the Secure Act? It does a lot of things. It changes employee retirement plans. If you are a really small business, gives you some more potential options. That could be an effect of it, which could be a good thing. It also provides for more annuity options within 401ks. Probably not a good thing. We'll see what happens there. So that is something that was a big win for insurance lobbyists in this bill. And so big insurance companies wanted that, and they got it. So we'll see what happens there. But how does this impact you? The biggest impact is the stretch IRA is gone, and RMD, required minimum distribution age, is pushed back to 72. The big impact with stretch IRA is last year, 6 months ago, before the Secure Act, if you had passed away and you had sent your IRA, you had your family as the beneficiaries, and so let's pretend that your IRA moved down to the next generation. So if you had 2 kids, well, each of your 2 kids, let's say it's a $4 million IRA, so a pretty big IRA, and your 2 kids each got a $2 million inherited IRA. So before the Secure Act, if your kids inherited your $4 million large IRA, they could each take their portion, $2 million each, and they could take RMDs on their own life. So your kids might be 40 years old. They inherit this account. And the IRS is only going to force them to take out a required minimum distribution off of their life expectancy, so they're able to stretch the distributions from the IRA, which are taxable as income. They're able to stretch it over the course of the rest of their life. That was a big win, especially because who inherits IRAs? Well, it's typically people that are 40 to 55 years old, sometimes younger, but you're usually in some of the best income earning years of your life. So that's a big deal. It's really valuable to be able to push off some of this and stretch some of this retirement income if you have an inherited IRA, because you're likely already making your own money. That is now gone. So you no longer have the ability for your kids to inherit your IRA and stretch out the required minimum distributions over the next 50 years. That was a big win when you were allowed to do it. It really minimized the income tax that your kids would pay on your IRA. Now, totally different. The Secure Act means you have 10 years to deplete the entire IRA. So let's go back to my example. $4 million IRA that is inherited by 2 children. So 2 kids, they each get $2 million. Now in this example, they have to take it out within 10 years. So they don't get to stretch anymore. They don't get to stretch it out over the rest of their life, which could be 40 or 50 years. They now have to take all of it within 10 years. And again, who inherits IRAs? Usually people 40 to 55 years old, maybe a little older, who are still in some high income earning years. So this has 2 effects. First of which, you have to deplete the entire IRA within 10 years. So you're going to face, your kids will face significantly higher tax bills, because if they have a $2 million IRA, so they've got to take $200,000 a year out for 10 years, and all of it has to be gone at the end of year 10. So in year 10, they have to take out everything. There's another really, really big wrinkle. So this is critical. If you have a trust that you set up a couple years ago, and that trust is listed as the beneficiary on your IRA. So if the trust is a beneficiary on your IRA, it's unbelievably important that we verify and check what is the trust language, what is the verbiage used that governs the rules of the trust. So just real quick, why would someone have a trust? Because you're putting rules or stipulations on what your beneficiaries can access, how much money they can access, how they can access it, what age do they have to be to access it. So if you have a trust and it's the beneficiary of your IRA, a lot of trusts were written with the language that the beneficiaries can access money up to the required minimum distribution. Because with stretch IRAs, that made all the sense in the world. You could put a trust in place, and it ensured that your kids didn't go spend $2 million, the very next month after you passed away. So your trust could put this stipulation that they only take the required minimum distribution each year, and that's it's somewhat common. It's not uncommon. And why is that an issue? Because the old law was all based on required minimum distribution, RMD. That word, that first letter, R, apologies for my handwriting there, but R, that's critical. R stands for required. So the trust language usually says they can take the required minimum distribution. Why is that big now? Well, we no longer have the stretch IRA. So we have a 10-year schedule that you have to take out all of the assets within 10 years, but you are not required to take out anything in the first 9 years. So if your trust has language that the beneficiaries can access your R&D each year, but not more than that, well, that trust is legally binding that your kids cannot take anything out of that IRA until there is a required minimum distribution. So, quick example, $4 million goes to two kids. They each have $2 million. If the trust governed that they could only take the required minimum distribution, they're not going to be allowed to take anything years 1 through years 2 through 9. And then in year 10, there technically is, again, a required minimum distribution. But in year 10, what is the required amount? That's right, it's 100% of the account. So they would have to liquidate the entire $2 million, probably grown over that 10 years, so it's probably more now. And they would have to take out the entire amount, and it would count as taxable income. And so again, very possible that if you set up a trust a few years ago and you've got a few million in an IRA and you've got a couple of kids that are going to inherit it, you need to look at this. This is pretty critical because it's not uncommon for trust language to dictate the R&D rule. There's actually an example that Jamie during the seminar shared that somebody had, you can access required minimum distribution, or you can access it according to the language allowed within the trust. And so the lawyer was on the phone with the client saying, see, we're good. Point B, you can not just R&Ds, you're also able to access it based on the other language in the trust. And Jamie's an attorney and a CFP, so he asked the attorney, okay, well, show me where this other language that allows the client to access the principal is located anywhere in the trust. And it didn't exist. So in essence, the way the trust is written, those clients could only take out a required minimum distribution. Why is that a big deal? Because your entire IRA, you wouldn't be allowed to take out anything for years. And then you get to year 10, you take out the entire thing. So just one quick example, but again, back to the 10-year rule. So if you have to take out an entire IRA within 10 years, we're talking about a lot more taxable income. Your taxable income also has a huge impact. If you're on the Affordable Care Act, all of your subsidies are then impacted. Net investment income tax, 3.8%, those are impacted. Medicare premiums, those are substantially impacted. So it's not just your income tax rate. All of these other ancillary items are impacted by what your income tax is. And so you end up paying a whole lot more. But quick update here. So with this new 10-year rule, it could really make sense to potentially not give your spouse your entire IRA. Now, this only applies if you have more assets than you probably need to live off of. And so, again, it's different for every single person. But I mentioned kind of a 2 million being somewhat of a cutoff, and it could be a little bit less, could be a little bit more, depending on your situation. But let's pretend that you have 4 million in an IRA. And so back to some of the situations that we're planning for, if you have 4 million in an IRA, it could make sense to leave a really healthy chunk to your spouse. Obviously, we want to make sure that your spouse has more than enough assets to live the rest of their life. But it could be really valuable to leave a healthy portion to your kids when the first spouse dies. That's a big deal because that splits up. In essence, what you just did is you just bought two different 10-year time periods that your kids can take distributions off of. So 4 million IRA. What if you leave 2.5 to your wife and you leave 1.5 to 2 kids? So then your 2 kids have $750,000 each in an IRA. They can take $75,000 out every year over 10 years. And then hypothetical scenario, maybe the second spouse passes away 12 years later. And then she's able to pass down her IRA, part of which came from the first spouse, to, again, there are 2 kids. The 2 kids have already liquidated the first portion or distribution payout from the IRA they inherited. Now they get a second 10-year schedule when the second spouse passes away. And so that's a simple way to alleviate some of the impact that having this 10-year rule, and there are some exceptions, by the way, but this 10-year rule is going to mean that your wealth, a lot of it's going to go to Uncle Sam rather than your family. And so this is one strategy to really alleviate some of that. With a Roth, you likely just want your spouse as the beneficiary because your spouse, again, Roth, that grows tax-free. And it goes down to the next generation tax-free. But when the next generation inherits the Roth, they cannot keep it in a Roth IRA forever. So Your spouse, likely a good decision for the Roth beneficiary because they get to retitle the Roth in their own name. So spouse 1 passes away, spouse 2 inherits that Roth, and it's not a inherited Roth or anything like that. It is spouse 2's Roth. And so spouse 2 lives another 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it is. They get to enjoy all of that tax-free growth. And then when spouse 2 passes away, we're not worried about the 10-year rule in the same way that we are with the IRA, because the Roth goes tax-free to the children. And so, again, we want to be cognizant, how much do you have in an IRA? So what am I saying? How big is your 401k plus your pension? And you may have some other little pieces there, old 401ks, old pensions. But all of your traditional rollover IRA dollars, your 401k, pensions, how big is that? If it's more than $2 million, you really need to be thinking through some of these things. And some of it will certainly play a role during your retirement, during your income that you receive year in, year out, this whole picture. But also, there's just simple things that we can do so that Uncle Sam doesn't get more than Uncle Sam's fair share. So we want to be cognizant of your future tax planning rate and how that ties into your estate plan, your investments, your retirement plan, the whole kit and caboodle. That's why we want to look at everything, and we want to be cognizant of how everything is moving, because missing this is going to be an unbelievably higher tax bill than it otherwise would. Probably do some more content. Jamie Hopkins during the seminar shared a lot on CRATs and CRUTs, so potential for charitable distributions within this plan as well that can maximize the money that goes both to your family and to charities. And so part of the fun thing about retirement planning, it's different for every single family I work with. So let me know if you have any questions, and leave a comment or shoot me an email, justin@brownleewealthmanagement.com. Thanks.